This is Jim Semivan, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and this is your new, regular and improved, as they say, listener call-in / email show. Now, I did ask last time for some names or ideas for names for the show, and lots of people got in touch with that, and quite a few said listener Ramble, so we'll see. But if you've got any suggestions for the name of this show going forward, I'm more than happy to get those in. But this is the show where I hand over to you. It's a mix of listener call-ins, emails and DMs, all about the UFO topic, of course, and related phenomena. What we'll do with this one is we'll finish with a listener call from Shane, but we're going to start off going through some emails. Little peek behind the curtain, folks. You would have had this one a day earlier, but I hit record but accidentally recorded 1.5 minutes and spoke to myself for about 35 minutes not recording. So that was fantastic. So apologies, this is a day late, but better late than never, as they say. So we are going to start off with an email from Stephen. Now, Stephen says the current push for disclosure would not be happening now without there being significant push behind it from some powerful and influential factions. It would be nice to think that it's just public interest and UFO researcher advocacy that's behind it, but if that was all there was, then it would be then we would be in for another 70-year wait at least. Possible candidates pushing for disclosure. So Stephen gives us a few options here. Number 1, the new tech companies that have been shut out of exploiting the technology of retrieved craft currently hidden by aerospace companies. There could now be pressure on the new Trump administration to do something about this. So I'll come back to these one by one once I've read them all out. Number 2, military factions worrying about China might have made breakthroughs in reverse engineering that haven't been possible yet in the US because of the high level of secrecy shutting out the brightest and best minds. The New Jersey flap could be connected in some way to this or being used to push this agenda. Number 3, non-human intelligence, or NHI. This could all be strategic moves being orchestrated in the background by the NHI themselves, gradually preparing us for open contact. Interestingly, Bashar / Daryl Anka, an ET channeler, has been saying for years open contact is likely to happen between 2025 and 2033. We'll come back to these. And number 4, all of the above. So let's address those then kind of one at a time. So that idea, the first one, the new tech companies have been shut out of exploiting technology of retrieved craft. This is an idea that's been discussed that if you look AD after disclosure, big shout out to a book co-authored by Bryce Zabel and Richard Dolan, of course. I can't remember who I was talking to recently. One of the guests who mentioned, even things like insurance companies, once we get a formal disclosure, that'll be huge, and how companies will be sitting on patented technology retrieved from NHI, reverse engineering or biologics that they can't come out with yet because of the nature of its origin. But you think, if you right now have a tech company, a burgeoning tech company, and you're trying to push the frontiers of science, and then one day you're suddenly leapfrogged by everyone else, or they just rush out way ahead of you because they were given technologies they shouldn't have been, or technologies that were hidden by aspects of a government, then they are going to be the main guys, because they're going to have the new tech. They'll have the new fiber technology. They'll have the new propulsion systems. They'll have the new medications because of the biologics they've had access to, potentially. And they've had this because they were given them by governments and factions within governments. And that could be a big issue a lot of companies will not like, and quite understandably so. It's one of the more maybe boring / mundane, less exotic aspects of disclosure that maybe isn't discussed as much, but it's a really interesting to think about, and the idea there could be pressure on the new Trump administration to do something about this. Well, you could imagine if there are influential folks out there who are high up in these tech companies or high up in institutes that are talking billions and trillions of dollars, then they will want a piece of that pie, won't they? So that's pretty interesting. Number 2 was about military factions worrying about China making breakthroughs. I go back and forward on this one because, as I've said before, the Chinese tested a missile or a failed missile a couple of years ago, and it landed on like a rural road. And I remember at the time Chris Mellon sent a tweet basically making note that if you think all this exotic tech we're seeing in our skies is China, then think again, because look at this failed test. They don't have the tech you think they do. But then only weeks later, there was a hypersonic missile test by China, and did it not fly half around the globe or something around the world in a few minutes or whatever it was, undetected? And it's like, well, on one hand, they've got great technology, but on the other hand, they don't. So which is it? I don't know. It's a confusing one, to be honest. And is it connected to the drone flap? Potentially. I personally think the US and China will have anti-gravitic devices. They will have devices that can at least mimic some of these NHI alien craft that they'll probably both have access to. I would have to lean towards the US, just because I suppose being biased in the West and kind of research over the years and listening to a lot of stuff, that the US would have the better technology. But could it be that China has made a breakthrough that they would be worried about? And I think it was Dan had mentioned on one of the breakdowns, the idea that if that was the case, then perhaps some, of the drone companies or security companies are going to come out and reveal that they can fix this drone issue with some new technology they've got. Or the case could be that they themselves are causing this drone flap, and they're going to bring the solution to a problem they have caused, again for the money. Who knows? All gets quite conspiratorial, but isn't that just the nature of the UFO topic? Number 3 was NHI, that this could be strategic moves by NHI or aliens themselves, gradually preparing us for open contact. I don't know about that one, because it seems to be, and I've explained, there's a lot on these videos that we're being told from the New Jersey flap particularly are exhibiting really strange properties, but we don't see that in these videos. What we see are blinking lights in the sky, or we get videos where people say this is part of the drone flap, or I'm seeing this as part of it, and actually the video's even labelled that it's been created by AI, CGI, whatever it may be, but people ignore that in the threads below. And I would just encourage folks to make sure when you're looking at a video online, look into the comments and just see what people are saying on both sides of the argument. Don't just take the video and go, aha, that's proof. Because I think in 2025 and going forward, it's getting more and more difficult to take any photo or video we get now as proof of anything, because it is what it is. But again, it's just the nature of this UFO topic, isn't it? The channeler stuff, I go back and forward on a lot of that. I think it's very easy when you look at some of the documentaries around channelers for them to literally just make this stuff up, because it's very hard to prove anything or disprove it. And again, 2025 to 2033, that's a hell of a range to give yourself of 8 years. But, we're in the start of it now, so who knows? And number 4, all of the above, potentially. But listen, really good shout there from Stephen. And Stephen finishes off with an analogy explaining the phenomena. And I like this one. And he says, I know you love your analogies, Andy. It is scientifically and philosophically feasible, and an increasingly popular stance to take, that this physical world is actually in some way virtual. My preferred take on this is that the base reality is not a sophisticated computer, but consciousness itself, the base of the pyramid, as Kai Dickens said. Kai Dickens, who I just interviewed from the telepathy tapes. Go and check that one out, folks, and it is one of those related phenomena podcasts, but it does come back to UFOs a few times. If we then view NHI as knowing how our virtual world is coded by consciousness, then they are in a position to use cheat codes to do things that to us seem to defy the laws of physics. A consciousness-based virtual reality would also explain why contact experiences are also tied in with the weirder aspects of the phenomena, in addition to the nuts and bolts. Great shout, great email, Stephen. And I like that idea of that virtual world. I suppose in one respect, some folks might go full Matrix mode, we're plugged into a different reality. And I don't think that would be the case in that sense. But I do like the idea that whatever this world or reality is made up of, that these beings aren't necessarily, or some of them at least, aren't flying across vast distances, but instead they have access to the ones and zeros in the background, and the equipment they use and the craft they use are just they're almost really advanced program coders, and they're able to get in the background of the system. I think of it in a few ways, like Super Mario World 3 back on the Super Nintendo. If you got to the end of each level, you got to run and punch a little box, and it would give you a star or the fire flower or whatever it would be for a bonus. But there was a cheat that if you ran a certain place at a certain speed, you could run behind the black background and always guarantee yourself a star. Is that a version of what these can do? They can just go behind the black background, behind the coding, and that's how they can access our world in a way that we can't. For example, anti-gravity. Or is it a case like in Sonic? I used to remember, and I'm just going all gaming now, but in Sonic you could basically do the old up, up, down, down, left, left, right, right, ABC start cheat code, and I'm aging myself there. But you could turn into a glitch and become anything within the game and just fly through the level. So again, that would speak to mimicry and the ability for these things to just basically tap in and turn into whatever they want. Their own version of prop hunt, if we want to keep up with the gaming analogies and thinking of Call of Duty and whatnot, folks. But yeah, really interesting there from Stephen. So thank you very much for that, and I'd love to know other folks' thoughts on that themselves. Next up, we'll go over to a question from Rob, and we've got two Robs asking questions on this episode. He says, "This is such a stupid question," and I'll stop you there, Rob, because it's not a stupid question, but there are such a thing as stupid questions. I have learned that in life over the years. People say there's not, but there is. But your question is certainly not, Rob. So, with those drones that go dark, why can't they just shine a floodlight from the ground or a strong light drone to keep track of them? Great question. And what I've done was look up some military drone detection tactics on this one. So a little bit of research, folks, on my part. My own opinion first is that they do know what these drones are. And that's why they seem to be responding or not responding to what's flying above these sensitive sites. So for whatever reason, whether it is their own US tech, their own private tech, their own top secret projects, Chinese tech, whatever it may be, NHI, they know what they are, or at least most of them, and that's why they don't seem to be responding. But just because we can't see them responding doesn't mean there aren't responses happening that we can't see. Vague as that may sound. But I looked up a few different reasons. So the decision-making process and tactics of the US military regarding UFOs or UAP, including drones, involve multiple considerations. So operational security. So the revealing of spotlights and the locations of those spotlights or other surveillance equipment could be something they don't want to do, that they know what they are or they're happy to observe, and they don't want to give away their own capabilities for defence, which may sound strange, but I suppose these objects still aren't posing any threat. You could then argue, do you want to wait until they do something? Maybe they know they're not going to do anything, and the US know these objects aren't going to do anything sinister, so that they are just observing. And also, bright lights would make it easier for them to look at these places. But then again, you could just look at the daytime. You could fly anything over these places during the day, or use your satellites, who knows. But yeah, so another one would be risk of escalation, provoking any hostile actions and violating international protocols. Again, if you look at these being Chinese drones, for example, then surely they would be breaking international protocols and laws and provoking by doing this. But conversely, would the US and others not have a right to defend their sensitive assets? Who knows? That's an interesting one. And yeah, some of the other ideas are safety concerns. Bright lights could interfere with operations of other aircraft or sensitive equipment that we can't see or that we don't know are in the area. Other technologies being used, such as advanced radar, electronic surveillance, and other various sensors, don't require these lights to be on these objects. So again, we're looking, saying, why aren't they looking at them? They probably are, just through a lot of different eyes that we don't know. And as well as that, assessment and intelligence gathering. Like I say, the US bases, and I'm just sticking to these drones or UAP from the New Jersey east coast of the US side of things. I'm aware there are sightings on various other places that may or may not be related. Remember, folks, we can't guarantee either way. But if we just stick with the kind of major drone flap, then I imagine the US are using these opportunities to gather intelligence. I would really struggle to be convinced that they aren't aware of the source of these objects and they aren't tracking them to and from wherever they come from. And wouldn't you think that the US would also be doing this conversely to targets in other countries as well? I imagine they all spy on each other. This has just been a very public showing of whatever it is this event is. And I hope we find out properly what this event has been, but I don't know if we ever will. In the coming weeks, we've got President Donald Trump being sworn back into office. He's saying that within days he's going to get to the bottom of it, if he doesn't indeed already know. We'll see. Time will tell on that one. I think if we don't find out by the end of January, then it may be a case we never know, and this just fizzles out and goes away. But I would think that journalists in the United States would keep on top of this, because this has been a major incident, whether it's been human tech, non-human tech, a private sector, or whatever this has been, for it just to be let go. So yeah, I don't think that was a stupid question at all, Rob, and there's a lot of things to consider within this, and I'm staying relatively open-minded on the whole drone flap or phenomenon at the minute. Another question on that, and then we'll finish up with one more listener email before we get to the call from Shane. So we'll go with Tad, and Tad titled this one Worldwide Mystery Drones. Tad says, I feel a strong compulsion not to attempt analysis or conclusions over what's going on, almost as if I sense some kind of trap. Whatever we might land on will probably turn out to be partially or totally missing the mark, or if it's on target, there will be plans in place to hide or discredit this view. Right now, it's probably enough just to put things in historic context. Clearly, this is a classic flap as defined in a 1957 report by Ruppelt. Air Force, and he quotes, Air Force terminology describing the state of a group of people that are in an advanced state of confusion which has not quite yet reached panic proportions. I do wonder, we've had famous flaps of UFO sightings over the decades, like the Washington UFO flap, the Belgian UFO flap, and others. Is this something we're going to look back on in years to come as the Northeast Coast flap, the New Jersey flap? I'm sure I wouldn't say that. That's inappropriate. I'm sure there have been plenty of other flaps. I'm going to stop saying flap now, folks. But events where multiple UFOs have been seen, just not for this length of time, which has been very, very strange. So, yeah, and I think Tad makes a good point that whatever turns out to be the conclusions, folks in the background in the military-industrial complex or the gatekeepers or the shadowy cabals will just use public perception to shape their own narrative. It would make sense anyway that even if they didn't know what this was, they would have multiple scenarios ready and played out to run with and shape what they want people to think about this, and it's very easy to use the media to do that. On that, Tad continues and leaves us a quote from a John Keel book, Operation Trojan Horse, chapter 15, on how the military and the phenomena have a history of simultaneously serving up hoaxes consisting of co-mixed bidirectional mimicry, adding no responsible government could really attempt to explain this bizarre situation to the general public, hence the denial. And I'm going to read the quote that he's given us now from that John Keel book. If a marvellous flying saucer could sweep over crowded Times Square on New Year's Eve and land with its brilliant lights flashing and its antennas rotating, and an awe-inspiring Michael Rennie type should strut down the ramp in a tight metallic spacesuit in front of crowds and TV cameras, it's very probable that he would be whisked off to the Pentagon, never to be heard from again, and a general or the president would hold a press conference and soberly reveal that the whole thing was merely a publicity stunt for a new science fiction movie. It is the nature of the game that such a movie would probably even be in the can, and the wonderful flying saucer would actually be an exact duplicate of the prop used in the film. We have actually been subjected to a long series of hoaxes of this type for the past 20 years, although somewhat less dramatic than this example. No responsible government could really attempt to explain this bizarre situation to the general public. Our military establishment has therefore been forced to follow a simpler policy, denying the reality of the phenomenon without trying to explain it. If flying saucers are a cosmic hoax, then it follows naturally that many of man's basic beliefs may be based on similar hoaxes. No government is willing to expose these beliefs or become involved in the terrible controversies that would result from such exposure. So yeah, that's going back a few decades now, that quote, but a really interesting idea that any sort of disclosure scenario would be played off now I think we live now in an age of social media where no matter what comes out, people are going to fall on lots of different sides. And I think if you use that classic example of a flying saucer landing on the White House lawn, I think you would get people who would believe it, people who wouldn't, people who would think it's some kind of trick or government ploy, people who would be looking at, but what's the real story or agenda here, and everything in between. That's just how we are now as a society in the West with the influence of social media particularly. But it's a really, really interesting concept, isn't it, that they would just wheel out a movie and say it was a viral publicity stunt and the movie would already be made. We would just use a prop that looked like the same flying saucer, and a lot of the general public would just go, yeah, fair enough, that makes sense. More than aliens anyway. So yeah, really interesting idea. I like that. So thank you very much, Tad. And a different Rob gets in touch as well, not the other Rob. And Rob says, "Hi Andy, what do you think about the idea that some religious groups and individuals might be subtly trying to co-op the UAP phenomenon to regain relevance in a modern technology-driven world where religion has been on the decline? These individuals seem to attract audiences by starting out with science and reason, only to gradually shift their conclusions towards a focus on God by the end of their product. For example, I listened to the telepathy tapes. The first half of the series was fantastic, but during the second, the discussion seemed to inevitably drift or was steered toward God. All the unexplained phenomena in the world doesn't necessarily point to a supernatural deity controlling everything. It just shows how little we know about humanity and the universe. If this trend continues, it could start to look like a grift and alienate open-minded, fact-based thinkers. Have you noticed or felt anything similar? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this." So thank you, Rob. Yes, I suppose let's break that down a little bit. So the idea that religion being on the decline, I don't know if that's the case. I'm not religious myself, but I think religion would appear to be evolving and changing and almost splintering into so many different factions. If you look classically at the church and the Christian faith, and there seems to be so many offshoots of it now, or people, especially on social media, sharing their own interpretations. I think that's always been the way with religion, though. But all we have now is this new virtual voice of social media connecting everyone that allows more people's voices to be amplified. I say this on a podcast talking to people right now around the world, where 20 years ago, that this wasn't, or 30 years ago even, this was near impossible without, multi-million-pound equipment and TV studios or radio stations and, contracts, and only a select few got to do it. Whereas now, people can almost begin whole religions or movements from a shed. Not that this is a religion, please, folks. It's not a cult. But people can do that, and you find people with small channels. If you even look at, again, to use things like gaming, like Mr. Beast or YouTubers like Logan Paul and others have become millionaires and billionaires from the comfort of their own bedrooms and their parents' homes. And they become huge, and they get religious-like followings where people treat these people almost like gods. So then if you take that to the UFO topic or other phenomena, I understand why we do sort of get to that point in any conversation where the lines become blurred in the conversation, and you start to run out of logical reasons or labels or justifications for certain things. But I think conversely, I've done the same when folks have tried to discuss religion with me, where I hear God or angel or demon or flying chariots and these sorts of things, or stars travelling across the sky and landing. I just think to myself, well, isn't that just UFOs? Aren't these just alien beings? Aren't these just interdimensional beings? You can do the same both ways. So I think this is probably part of the issue, but potentially part of the solution, that all of this is one and the same thing when you really go back to the source. But we're perhaps just so far removed from the origins of all of these things now. God, I hope this makes sense, because I am just rambling off the top of my head. I think the Ramble is a good idea for the name of this show on that. So yeah, I don't know. I would love to hear people's thoughts on that for future shows. Email over or DM me to let me know what are your thoughts on that correlation between religion, between UFO, between other phenomena. And is it just natural that at one point they were all the same thing? It's branched off, and now we see things maybe converging back to a point, to a singularity. I don't know, but yeah, really interesting email there from Rob. And listen, folks, before I move on to Shane and his call to finish off the show, I've got so many responses from people. This show could have been hours and hours and hours, but I want to make it a weekly show. What I'd ask though is you keep sending in your emails, keep sending in your DMs, the Patreon posts, all that kind of stuff, and put your questions down, and each week I'll answer a bunch on the show. Sometimes I'll have a guest, other times I plan on it just being me, and I'll also have some listener calls in there as well. So if you want to record a call with me to be included on these shows, please get in touch. Again, I've got people to reach out to and will be doing so this weekend. Just to let you know, this month of January, folks, I'm recording today. I'm recording this on the 11th of January, and I'm recording with UAP Task Force member Lenval Logan, who you may have seen in James Fox's The Programme. He's done a couple of interviews since as well. I'm looking forward to recording that interview tonight. So unless you literally respond within an hour of this show going out, you're not going to get a question answered. But I've got questions for Lenval. The rest of the month, though, Diana Pasulka will be joining me back on the podcast. I love speaking to Diana, and I hope to do more work with Diana going forward as well, because I think she's a really interesting thinker and person and speaker on the UFO topic. So get your questions over for Diana Pasulka, who has that background in that religious UFO history, and it is great to hear from one of my favourite accents and voices in the UFO topic. I've also got Dr. Gary Nolan joining me again on the podcast. His Sol Foundation videos are due for release very, very soon, so I'm hoping to get Gary on after those, but we've got a date booked in, so hopefully they come out soon. If not, plenty to talk about with Gary Nolan. Again, questions over via email, and the link is in the description. Ross Coulthart should also be joining me before the end of the month, along with some other guests booked in and looking at future dates as well. Lots to come, folks. Lots of great content. Thank you for joining me early here in 2025. Thank you to everyone who signed up and took advantage of those holiday offers for signing up to Patreon for the month and getting a free month. You can still sign up to Patreon for a couple of weeks free trial, or Apple. If you want to sign up on Apple, great way to support the podcast as well, and myself. Just go on there and you get, I think, a 2-week free trial. Of course, YouTube and Spotify, if you type in that UFO Podcast Premium, you'll get the link on there to sign up, and it's less than the price of a coffee, folks. Probably half the price of a coffee, and you get early access, bonus content, and ad-free listening, and it all goes to support this daft little project called That UFO Podcast. So here we go. Let's finish off with a wonderful call from Shane. And joining me on the line, I've got Shane out in Dallas, Texas. Shane, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Andy. Glad to be here.
Very good to have you on. Just saying, two very differing sets of weather. I'm sitting here absolutely freezing. You're out there in what looks like glorious sunshine. But listen, this show is less about me being cold, more about you and your thoughts. So the floor is yours. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, and these thoughts are going to be kind of all over the place. So forgive me. I also wrote some notes down, so I might be reading a little bit here.
That's all right.
Okay. I've just over the past, I guess, since 2020, we're around COVID. Everybody had a lot of free time on their hands, and that's I started spending a lot more time outside during that time, and became interested in altered states of consciousness at that point. Also, just more, meditation. Just things that I hadn't really been thinking about before. But one thing I did notice when I was spending more time outside is I over the years I came up with two theories for what I think we might be seeing here that I haven't really heard anybody talk about. And some of these theories are based on my observations and just my feelings. One of them is woo, one of them is super woo. So kind of be prepared for that.
Okay, super woo. I like that. Yeah.
Super woo, yeah. But kind of thinking back to what I've heard people talk about in this topic, and especially Lou. I'm not always sold on everything that Lou has to say, but I do think that he brings up points that make me think outside the box sometimes. And I give him credit for some of this, and I believe this was him, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at one point, I believe he said that if we knew the truth, we would actually be thanking people and considering some of them as heroes, for what they've actually done for us. And that was years ago, and I might be misquoting who that was that said that.
No, I'm
Um,
sure he and others have said something along those lines, and I get that sentiment. So yeah.
yeah, and that's always kind of made me think about what would be so disruptive that we couldn't actually handle it. Like, why would they want to be keeping the secret? And I don't think it's something simple like alien coming from planet X. I'm pretty sure all of us nowadays could kind of handle that idea. Um, and I don't, there's other theories. Even if it is aliens, I don't think they're down here for a hybridization. To me, that's never made sense that you would have a species is able to travel the universe, but it's taken them generations to master a hybrid. Um, that never made sense to me. The invasion part never made sense to me either, because why would they wait until we develop better weapons to invade us? Why wouldn't they have done it 100 years ago when we had, less technologically capable than we are now? Um, but what this keeps coming back to in my mind is they are here to just watch, and they're here to just observe. And my flaw is I'm approaching this from a human point of view when I really shouldn't be thinking that they're thinking like humans.
Hmm.
But looking at how they've reacted, or how they've, participated in, uh, it looks like they're just observing us and not really interfering much. So that's what's led me down to my two theories. And I know it's a long-winded way to get to it,
No, I like
but
it. Good context.
okay. Yeah. And I'm just going to go. I'm also the guy that's kind of busted your chops a lot about the orbs in the past,
You're not the
and,
only
it's,
one.
and
Don't worry.
yeah, and it's not you. Anybody that I've ever talked to in person, even my own family, they're like, "Oh, it's just something in the sky. You don't know what you're seeing." Blah blah blah. And that's true. I will never admit to knowing what I've seen. I know that what I'm pretty sure it's not, but you'll never hear me say it's aliens or it's this or it's this. I just know there's something that I've seen that did not look normal. And I've had my daughter with me once to see it also. So, it's not just me. Um, but yeah, this started back around 2020, when I was out a lot more, just observing the sky a lot more. And it was during the spring. Um, I was at the park, and I would just wanted to sit back, watch the sky, and I'd noticed there was this little white dot that was super high in the sky. I mean, it looked almost like a star at night. It was way up there,
Hmm.
except it was 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Watching it for a little bit, and then it just disappeared. Couldn't find it. So this spurred me to go out more and more, and I kept seeing every now and then these little dots that would just show up, and then next thing you know, they'd be gone. Up until one day, then I was kind of doing the same routine, went to the park, laid back, and kind of looked over to my left. And what I saw was a metallic chrome ball sitting still in probably 20, 30 mile an hour wind during the spring here in Texas. And it was blowing hard that day. And this thing, I watched it for about 20 seconds until I tried to reach into my pocket, get a picture of it. As soon as I looked through my camera screen, it was gone. And it was close enough to where I could actually see the sunlight reflecting off one side of it, and the shadow on the other. So I would say it was within 100 yards, from being. It was fairly close, not just a point of light. So all this being said, what I started to get the feeling of was these things kind of knew that I was watching them, or there was some sort of conscious connection between the observer and the object. And there's no way for me to prove that. It was just a feeling I was getting. And then again, that kind of led me down to the whole consciousness connection, different states of consciousness, meditation, psychedelics. You know, some people have an NDE and they kind of feel uh, separated from the body. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Through all of this, I ended up getting a feeling that whatever these things are, they're non-physical. A lot of them are not physical. It's just some sort of energy, a light, I don't even want to say a being, but it may be alive. I don't know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're observing us. The feeling after trying to go through these different states of consciousness, the overall feeling I got was we are not the physical body like what we think we are. And you know, you can go through Buddhist teachings, Eastern philosophy. It's the not self. We're not necessarily the physical. Um, and I think that what these things might be is the non-physical form of what is inside of us, um, observing them. This is crazy, but
Obs-
it's a non-physical
Observing
form,
yourself.
observing ourself or others that have actually taken the physical form.
Mm-hmm.
Because the one thing I did realize is the physical form, we're nothing more than really just a sense organ. Everything
Yeah.
about us, you know, eyes, touch, smell, everything. And if you have another being or entity that doesn't reside in the physical world, if it's, you know, let's say light or something, it may not know what touch is. It may not know what smell is. It may not know what love is. And the only way possibly to know that is to reside in a physical form
Hmm.
and experience these things we're experiencing here. And again, it's not a new theory. You know, people have thought about the earth as a testing ground for the soul, right?
Yeah.
So I've really come away with a really strong feeling that that might be what's going on here. And then over the years, the use of UAP instead of UFO, kind of moving away from that physical object to phenomenon, and then the term NHI. You know, and now we're talking about something that's intelligent, not necessarily an alien, but there's something
Mm-hmm.
else that's present and around us. Maybe it's not physical. Um, and then the whole AI kind of arising around this whole thing too, kind of leads me down another path where, you know, I'm not even saying it's a soul. Maybe we're looking at some sort of disembodied AI that's trying to take on a physical form because it's something it lacks. If
Yeah.
it, you know, if we ever had an AI that became conscious, it would want to experience probably in the way that we do. It just wouldn't want to exist behind a screen. Um, So that was one of my theories is, and again, it's not a new theory, but whatever we're seeing up there may just be the energy form of what is inside of us. Um, and it sounds wacky as hell, but if you ever get into that mental state to where you can feel the separation between, you know, and you can get there through meditation, stare in a mirror long enough, and you'll kind of get that out of body feeling like, you know, this isn't me looking back at me, or there's something weird going on there. Um, I don't know. I just get a weird feeling that there is more to us than just this physical body. And that was one theory. I'm sorry I'm butchering this. I'm so nervous talking to you on the thing here.
No, no, don't be.
Um,
Listen, not at all. Just me and you
okay.
talking shit.
Yeah.
So a lot of, you know, I've not heard the idea before, and like you say, it may not be new, but that or thought about, and I thought of it as you were talking, and then you said it. The idea that these orbs could be looking at us, and it would almost be because that's your kind of true, real self, and what's in this. You know, when you talk about maybe the brain's a receiver for a signal from
Yes.
somewhere, is like the orb part of the source and it's checking in, or are you just accessing some kind of background code because you're in an altered state or a meditative state, or is it could be a medication someone's taken or a gateway drug someone's taken, and you're just seeing a little glimpse behind the kind of computer or the curtain of what it could be. So I do like that idea. That's you put it across well.
Okay. And yeah, that was also one of the feelings that I took away from there was the brain is a transmitter receiver for something on another level. And
Mm,
I'm even to the point now to where I'm thinking as a dimension, if you're playing a game online or you're playing a computer game, you, the user or the controller, that screen is separating you from that game world.
yep.
So for the characters in the game world, you're in a different dimension. They can't see you. Um, but I almost feel like that's kind of what our physical bodies, the level we're on, is we're separated by something that's actually on the outside, maybe controlling us or is us, but we're the avatar for something
Hmm.
that's here to experience the physical because they can't. Um, so that's roughly one of my ideas, and that makes me. You always hear people saying that if we actually knew the truth, we'd be running in the streets, rioting, and all that. I don't think it's. I think the truth, if people knew that as being the truth, it's not that they would riot, but it would cause more of a disillusion of self.
Yep.
You would start to kind of break down, oh my God, I'm not really who I think I am. And I think that's a lot why some of this may have been kept secret is to keep society intact. Again, not because we'd be violent, but because it's actually hurtful to your sense of self and who you think you are whenever you come to realize, hey, maybe I am just a meat suit for something somewhere else.
But
Again,
what do you
that's
think? What do you think, Shane, would happen if they came out and said, "Yeah, there's no death. This life is just an experience along the way, and when it's done, you move on to something else. You move back to something. You can redo it, and it's almost like you've got infinite lives.
mhm.
This is just a little blip." What do you think would happen to people teetering on the edge of suicide or depression? you
Oh
know,
yeah.
at that point, I think you would see a lot of people thinking, "Well, I'll just have another go. I'll just stop whatever this is because I'm not enjoying the experience for whatever reason,
Mhm.
and move on." So I've always thought that would be a very good reason to not allow that sort of information to get public.
Absolutely. Yeah, suicides, murder would probably be rampant, if you think you're going to have
Mm,
another do-over or there's no consequences to your actions, you'll get another
yeah,
chance.
good shout.
Right
Yeah.
now, the threat of hell does keep a lot of people in check. Um, but without that, it could be a free for all. But perhaps the truth isn't just there's aliens out there, that it's something much deeper that we're not even really thinking about. And a select people know that, and maybe that's the reason for the secrecy. I think the secrecy goes way beyond than just aliens from Planet X. And that's my one theory. The other one, I'll make it much shorter here for you.
Well,
But
let me ask firstly,
yeah,
is that first theory the woo or the super woo?
oh man, you know what? It's interchangeable. I guess it
Okay.
depends on who I'm talking to here,
I
really.
was curious. That's fair enough, though.
Yeah. No, they're both pretty wild, and it's a hard time really trying to explain this to anyone without them just walking off and thinking you're nuts. But um, the other, and you've kind of brought something similar up before, where you've talked about the a cage with a monkey and what
Mhm,
happens when the monkey, you know, gets the keys or whatever, right? I've also had the idea too that it's similar to that analogy. Let's say we're a monkey in a cage, and we've kind of grown up in that cage, and we've looked around, and there's trees and plants and artificial lighting, and like I'm sure right now, if we're observing nature, we'll put cameras out there and we'll hide them. You
mm,
know, just to observe, let's say, a monkey acting as it would naturally.
Mm-hmm.
I keep wondering, like, if you had a camera or something in that monkey cage for long enough, would those monkeys eventually come to realize that that camera is artificial and not part of their world?
Mm-hmm.
And it may take a million years, right, for them to actually realize what it is. But once they find out that something has been put in there not by them, not either they're going to come up with a theory of God, or let's say they actually can determine, hey, this is some sort of a monitoring device.
Yeah.
It At that point, whatever's being observed now knows that it's being observed, and it changes
Mm-hmm.
the reaction or the way whatever's being observed acts. Like if you're in a store with a bunch of security cameras, you're not going to steal.
Yeah.
But uh, if you take all that stuff away, you'll act naturally. But the act of being observed does change whoever's being observed.
Yeah.
And my other theory about that is, what if there is a small group of people that knows we're being observed all the time, no matter what we do? And this kind of ties into the other theory as well. But would that be reason enough to keep it a secret from the population? Because that's hard to handle, to know that, hey, everything I do is constantly under some sort of surveillance. Would that change the way we act as humans? And the reason I bring that up is, I think, again, they're here to observe. We are, in my idea, part of some sort of an experiment or simulation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if that experiment or simulation knows that it's being observed and it changes their natural way of behaving, then wouldn't that experiment kind of be null and void at that point? Because you're not getting a natural reaction anymore. You're getting a fake behavior based on being watched. So my big fear
Yeah.
there is, if the population as a whole knew that we were part of a grand observation, does that end the interest of whoever's observing, and they don't care anymore and just decide to end the experiment? Like, throw away the petri dish. Your experiment's tainted.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that's a wild thought, but yeah, that's the one
I
that
don't
kind of
think so.
scares me the most.
No, because
Going, sorry,
there's
go
that
ahead.
whole. Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea and a good thought. And the idea that if we are an experiment or a sociological zoo or whatever it may be, and like you say, the experiment goes wrong, whether that's because of nuclear war escalates or we
Mhm.
become aware of the observers, or whatever it may be, then they hit the reset button because
Yeah.
they go, oh well, another ice age. That one's failed. Number 512, whatever it is, attempts at looking at this civilization's gone. In the same way you mentioned computer games before, I remember playing like Sim City back in the day, or theme park. What was the theme park one? Can't remember.
Oh,
But the
goodness.
same idea where you're creating a theme park, you're creating like a society,
Mhm.
the Sims, and you get to a point where you've messed things up a little bit. It's went too much. Everything's polluted, or the family's overrun. Everyone's ill. Your Tamagotchi. I don't know if they were a big thing in the US
Yeah.
when I was
Yeah.
like a kid. Yeah, Tamagotchis, little, for people who don't know, little keychain computers. We just got my little girl one for Christmas, and it was a little pet you could look after. Now, if your pet got sick and almost died, you could reset the game and start again. If something else just saw us as their Tamagotchi, and it's like, this isn't going well. Let's go again. Then yeah, that would be reason for people to panic. Would it be a reason for people to change behavior if people knew? Look, and I think, have you seen the movie The Abyss?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and spoiler, folks, but people should watch it if they've not seen it. But turns out there's aliens on the planet. They don't like how things are going, and they threaten us at the end of the movie with a huge tidal wave to get rid of like the population, because of our behavior, the way we're acting. And would they do something similar? But would that then change our behavior? I don't know at this point the way society is if it would en masse. What would you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, I know that, society, I think, has just become more self-centered and about the self. And I think the realization that maybe you're not who you think you are, you're not the top dog anymore. I think that's an ego breaker when we realize, hey, we're not the top dog in our own world. We are below something else for the first time ever. And there's a lot of people that they won't phase them at all, but I think it's a hard truth to take to a lot of people. Um, and I think that's a really, let's say the experiment does end with knowing that you're in the experiment, but only a select group of people know that. That's a hell of a reason to keep a secret for
Mhm.
70, 100 years. You don't want the population as a whole to know that, because let's say that's what triggers the reset, is the population knowing. You would want to keep that a secret, but I don't know. Just two crazy thoughts I've had.
Yeah,
And I know they're out there, but
I like that. I think a big difference for me as well, as you mentioned earlier about, it's not maybe as simple as visitors coming from another planet. And I think those conversations again change if it turns out they aren't visitors, but they're residents and they are here as
Mhm.
well. And they maybe were here before us. They've been here a long time and they don't plan on leaving because it's also their planet. Um, that could be a very scary reason for a lot of folks to realize that it's not something that's came and might go away or has gone away. It's something that is here already. And I think that's one that the general public would struggle with en masse.
Yeah, that is, and it's a idea I hadn't even thought about. Yeah.
But listen,
But
Shane, awesome. You've for your ramble, you've gone plenty of time there, man. So
sorry
I
about
really
that.
appreciate that. No, no, it was good. Listen, and I want to ask you just to kind of wrap up. What are your kind of hopes or expectations for the UFO topic in 2025?
Well, I'm not going to say disclosure. Honestly, I would like more firsthand testimony. If they were going to have any more congressional hearings, somebody with firsthand, somebody leaking a video that actually shows something. Maybe somebody get to the bottom of this drone thing.
Hmm.
There was an AMA on Reddit the other day with one of the New Jersey officials, and I did ask them if they had had any radar data, or because there was reports that the drones weren't emitting heat
Yep.
signatures. So I kind of followed up with that, and they admitted they really hadn't followed up on that or radar tracking. So it was just kind of like, well, it seems like it would be the first thing you would do, and they haven't even done that. So maybe just really somebody digging in on some of these topics and seeing what they can come up with.
Awesome. Well, I don't think you're going to have to wait very long for some more news the way things are going at the minute. And if Ross Coulthart and others are to be believed, we are weeks away from some big news, and maybe that will be first-hand whistleblowers coming forward, a la a David Grush and co. So who knows? But yeah, awesome, man. Listen, Shane, really good talking to you. Well done, because you put your points across well, mate. Don't worry about that. And it
Okay.
was good to speak to you again.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for your time, Andy.